Let's focus on the Hyperscale Manager provisioning tasks now. As you can see on the login screen here, I have put in my admin credentials. Let's log in now. Here's the dashboard. As you can see, the Flash System A9000, the XIV, and Spectrum Accelerate. Here's two A9000s, here's one XIV, and here's one Spectrum Accelerate. As you can see, it's also off-premise by the cloud icon. Each one of them actually has a mouse over and the physical size displayed as a decimal up above with a gauge in the center. You can see the same on the XIV and Spectrum Accelerate in the same way. Underneath those gauges, we actually have a different display. We have the virtual capacity. You can actually see the allocation for each particular family. And again, here it is in a decimal as well as a gauge display. You can see 2.8 petabytes out of 546 for the two Flash System A9000s. And you have the gauge which shows that as well. And we have a similar display for the XIV in the center. And last but not least, Spectrum Accelerate. I can change this display to see how much the hosts have actually written. So notice the display has changed. So this is how much is written before compression. So look at the 477 out of 546 in the two Flash systems. In the XIV and in the Spectrum Accelerate, you actually see the differences between the allocation and the written. If I go to the lower left, let's take a look at the reduction savings and thin provisioning. We call this efficiency. Take a look at the reduction savings with the ratio, as well as the decimal readout of how much savings that is, including thin provisioning. Then we have the total efficiency down below the totals of the above. Each one of these has a pop-up, so you can actually see the actual explanation for any of these values. There's a calculation. We can also change this to actually include the metadata. Metadata is the basic storage overhead around all of the dedupe and compression algorithms. Now that it's checked, you can actually see the difference in the ratio and the savings. And again, the mouse overs still work, and you can actually see how the actual calculation is produced. And this includes the reduction as well as thin provisioning and total efficiency. Let's take a look at how we can filter this view. You see how we can filter a view just for the all Flash systems. So notice the dashboard has changed, as well as the efficiency. Again, the metadata is checked, so you can actually see the values for those two systems. How much is written versus how much is allocated. Here's the written with the pop-up. And you also see the pop-up for the allocation. And out of how much, or the projected system capacity. Now this is projected. That's a very important term, and take a look at the text down below because we can change this based on your particular business needs. In XIV and Spectrum Accelerate, we don't have deduplication in the same way, so we don't have this particular gear in those particular systems. Take a look at the gear ratio here. This is how we can change the projected system ratio. Notice the hot link so that you can actually click on it and go immediately to how we calculate out the projection of the deduplication and compression on an A9000. Here's the link. Feel free to click on it. And as you can see, because we clicked on the gear icon, we can actually change what is my system size. Notice it actually will start with the starting point, the 350 terabytes, and then, as you can scroll down, we actually have the choice of choosing the calculation method. A combination of my own estimation plus the actual reduction rate, or we can actually change some of those subvariables down below. You can see that you can put in your own estimation or your own system actual reduction rate, which will change over time. Notice I can change my reduction ratio just by highlighting and putting in a new reduction ratio. For example, I can put in 5:1, I can put in the 5. So as you see, I can actually keep both of those values checked and it will actually do its variable based on those algorithms, or if I unselect one of them, it'll update. Now if I actually keep this particular checkbox, it will change quite a bit. If you want to be on the safe side, you can actually use a fixed ratio. So for example, if I want to use a fixed ratio, I will have a fixed number. If I actually put the actual only, you see how it will actually change over time and have more fluctuation. If I want to see how this is going to turn out, I can actually see down below the result. You can see how this varies depending on each particular variable or the values you're putting into those checkboxes. I'll click on cancel right now and go back to some other tasks. I'm going to go back to the dashboard now. So here's my two A9000s. You can see the system capacity and the projected. We were just there with the gear icon. Here's the reclaimable capacity popover that we talked about earlier. We can actually reclaim some of this because some of those volumes are not even used, which means I can actually reclaim it. You can see that I have 250 terabytes, which is reclaimable. If I want to do that, I can click right on this link, which will automatically bring up a particular filter, those 41 volumes which are not being used and which I can reclaim. If I right-click, and I can delete them with one click. I'm going back to the dashboard now, and again, I click on the two Flash System A9000s and take a look. You actually see the projected system capacity, and let's look at the physical usage now. You see the gauge up above along with the pop-up and mouse over, so it actually shows the decimal as well as a graphical readout. I see that I have 193 terabytes, or 27.6%, out of 700 terabytes that is actually physically being used. Again, I can change when I include the metadata. Now let's go to the health. Notice my health score for those two Flash A9000s. It's 94%, and under the capacity, I have a negative 3%. So if I click on it, I can actually see how this happened. As it shows, I have a physical usage above 54%, which is above a configurable threshold, which I can change. I also have a best practices tip, so that I have reclaimable capacity that I can actually reclaim. We talked about this earlier. If I go to connectivity and security, you see that I have a negative 3% up above, plus a whole bunch of best practices tips. If I go to mapping, I also have another best practices tip that 4 hosts are not mapped to any particular volume. If I go to capacity, or if I go to the health, you see how I can change things. I can go to the alerts icon, and in the alerts icon it shows my major, minor, and warning alerts. And again, each one of these has a mouse over or pop over so that I can actually click on each particular one to take advantage of those hot links. And as you can see on this last alert, I have 81% full on a particular pool, which is configurable from a threshold, so I can change that as well. If I click on capacity and I want to actually change the system and physical usage threshold, I could click on that, which will immediately go to that particular system, and there's the alert, which caused that negative 3% with the color. And those are my columns, which I can adjust. I can see it here as a gauge, and there's the color coding for that particular gauge. I can also see it as a decimal readout on the right-hand side. Now, if I want to fix it, I can actually do a right-click and then go to the actual capacity and then change the thresholds. Let's take a look at the system. I have 5 hosts defined. If I click on those 5 hosts, it actually shows me the H, which I click on it, and that hot link takes me right to those particular 5 hosts. And as you can see, they're now shown. You can see the volumes, and you can also see that some are not mapped to any particular volumes. As you can see below, all of those hosts are doing some IOPS, and I can bring up this as a nice chart. Here's the particular graph with a live chart, so I can actually click on each particular max or minimums out of all those active hosts that I've selected. You can see the IOPS total. Now if I want to jump, I can actually click on each one of these as a hot link inside each of the lines. So for example, I am now going just to host 1 or host 1, 2, and 3. Notice out of those particular hosts, I have 32 mappings. Those are the 3 hosts and the 32 maps. I can click on just those 32 volumes. Notice the IOPS latency and bandwidth are updated below for just those 32 volumes. Now if I want to focus on just one volume, I can just click on one and it'll automatically update down below. Let's go and create a new host. Here it is. Let's type in a name. Let's put this host in 2 different systems. So I'm going to pick a particular Flash system, A9000. I can make it as part of a cluster if I want to, or create a new cluster. Since I said I wanted to add this host to another system, let's pick that other system now, and this one, an XIV. Again, the same situation where I can put it in a cluster if I want to. And now the last step we need to do is to define a port for this host, or ports for this host to use. You can see that I can click on the drop-down, and it shows me exactly what is or isn't being used. I then click, and I can click on Create. So now the host is created, and it actually is defined on two different systems, two different domains, and there's no volumes yet mapped. Here's the hub of that particular host. You can see, again, no mapped volumes and nothing has been written, and there are no volumes or snapshots. If we want to click on the connectivity, you'll see it shows that the XIV Gen 3 is connected. There it is on that particular diagram. You can see the fiber channel port to the actual XIV on Module 7. So I click on the host. You can see that the mapping is dotted. There's 0 mapping, so let's add one. So let's add a system. There's the XIV Gen 3. Let's add a volume. We can actually create a volume, as you notice at the top. Let's create a new one. So you see we've opened up a new tab with the host test mapping and the volumes, the other tab. So one is dependent upon the other, that's why they're red. So we're actually going to close the one after the other one is satisfied. So let's name this volume. Let's give it a size. We need to make sure it's part of a pool. Now we've grabbed that particular pool. As you see, it's uncompressed. Once we create it, it will actually then take care of that particular tab. Notice that we've gone back to the host tab now. And now, as you can see, the red is gone, and now we're ready to map that volume to the host because it's now created. And we can even add another volume if we want to. We'll pick one from the A9000 now, and we'll create a new volume. Notice, again, the tab has happened. So we're creating a test volume number 2, and we're going to put this on the A9000. I'm going to look for a pool right now, and as I scroll down, it looks like that pool doesn't have enough free space, so I can either change the pool or increase the size of that particular pool's allocation. Let's take a look at that right now. So I'm going to the pool. You'll notice a new tab has come up. So if you notice the other reds, they're all dependent and they're all still ready to finish once I satisfy the underlying condition. So now if I look at my allocation here, and let's increase its allocation size. So as you see, I now have some more space. I've applied. Now my volume has gone from red to standard. So I'm ready to create this volume now. Watch. Now I'm back to the host. It's actually satisfied those underlying conditions. And notice the other condition. Here it is, the flash system A9000 with that particular pool. And notice you can see both of the systems. We did not have to switch around between other menus. We were able to do this all seamlessly, all within the same tabs that automatically generated and removed themselves. Now we've mapped to 2 systems and 2 volumes. My hub shows the same thing. So if I click on those 2 volumes, notice they show up. They show me the XIV Gen 3 as well as the flash system. They're both 100 gigabytes. And you can actually see the written as well as the total size. Now if I do the Gen 3, notice it is not compressed because we haven't compressed it yet. But if we wanted to, we can change that with that button. In the A9000, it's automatically deduped and compressed. I can select both volumes again and notice that there's 0 IOPS or latency or bandwidth down below. Let's create another volume now. This will be our 3rd volume, and let's name it. And let's create 3 of them. We'll create 100 gig each. We'll put it on the XIV. We'll select a particular pool. And then I click Apply. So there it is. Our display is updated. There are my 3 volumes on the Gen 3, 100 gig each. And now let's map them. So let's use the same host we used earlier. So I can actually use the test host. And I can choose a LUN. I can actually notice what LUNs have been used or start on a new LUN. If I click on Apply, Now I have mapped those 3 volumes to one particular host. Let's use a filter right now. So I can either start by using the type ahead navigation up above by using the same name, test dash. Notice the matches. You can see the volumes, and there's the 8. So take a look at all the volumes that have that particular criteria. Now if I want to clear that filter, I can actually put in the same name, and now let's take a look for hosts. Take a look. Here's the test, and far down below, host name contains, and it sees the 4 matches. And I can actually jump right to one of those matches right now. There's that test host, and there's those 5 volumes. And notice I can actually click and go directly to those 5 volumes there. You can see it on both sides, the left side or the right side, where the hub shows the 5 volumes. And you've also seen how we can jump around using the left-hand side and hot links. I can also change my columns. We can add mapping, and now that I've added those particular, I see actually the LUN ID and the cluster. You can see the LUNs, and also this is adjustable using the columns button up above. So if I select just the XIV Gen 3 volumes, notice the 4, I have the ability to compress them. I can see what's written or what the total size is. If I click on the compress button, it'll ask me how I want to compress. Let's actually look at mirroring now for those 4 volumes. We can add an async mirror. So there's the XIV Gen 3, and we can put it to the accelerate or the cloud version of the XIV. And you see it's connected. Now we need to select a remote pool. We've done that. And it'll automatically create those volumes on the far side. And how often do we want the recovery point objective? We click apply. It's mirroring all those volumes. And now you'll see that the display updates. Notice the 4 volumes are now put in the async mirror category. You'll notice that the availability pop-up is also showing the same thing. You'll see that the connectivity, the status, and the role. Those volumes are now mirrored to the Spectrum Accelerate in the cloud. Let's clear the filter. Let's look for a specific host. For example, I'll put in demo host, and I have 12 that match that particular criteria. If I narrow it down further with a 2, you'll see which one I'm looking for. So here's 2_1. And that's 23 volumes are mapped. I can see the total IOPS and the latency and the bandwidth down below. I can see how much is written and how much the volumes and the snapshots contain. And there's the gauge on the left-hand side. I can see that this is all part of one particular system. And I can see those 23 volumes right here. If I expand the IOPS, you can actually see all the IOPS. Here's the host, and you can actually see the total of the IOPS there. If I want to change, all I have to do is go into history, and I can actually go back. And if I drag, you can actually see the history going back and forth. I can also change this up above, so I can filter by interface as well. Once I select an interface, I can actually then narrow down to a particular port. And here's the IOPS again. If I zoom out now, I can actually fit in another chart and put it on the same screen. So now I can change this particular chart to mapped volumes. So here's the current IOPS up above. And let's actually do the same down below. So we have a host down below, a mapped volume up above. So here's the current IOPS and then a particular volume up above. And notice that they are in lockstep with each other. The maximum and the minimum are displayed up above. Notice the hot links. And then the host by itself with the total amount of IOPS that it's being served. If we close the particular charts, let's actually go to the host itself. So as you can see at the host, I can actually change the columns if I want to. As you see, I have not checked the volumes and snapshots are written by the host, but I could add them if I want to. And the same thing with capacity savings. I could actually add the potential compression. Let's jump to the 23 volumes. As you can see, here's my 23 volumes. Again, I see the capacity, I see the size, and of course I can even add other columns. Here's the free size, Now, if you want, I can also go to the capacity savings, and notice I have some other columns that I could add to my particular views. Here's the savings, as well as unique stored data. Let's go to pools right now, and here's all my pools in the environment. You can see how much is written out of the total allocation for each particular pool. If I select one of them, you can actually see this particular pool. I can see that it's named for exchange. And there's the free space. And I can see right now that I do not have any physical management for just a particular pool. Now, if I compare this to an XIV, I actually do have a slightly different view. This is because of the architecture differences between the XIV and the A9000. Now you see the allocation. And here's the stored information. Notice the gauge on the left-hand side with the thresholds already defined. You saw earlier in this video how we can actually change those thresholds. One of the best features about the HSM is that you have so many different columns you can add, modify, and then save for any of the views. Now if I scroll to the right, I can see the reclaimable capacity, how much I can reclaim back. I can actually see the growth rate as well as the thresholds. If I scroll down, you can actually see that there's a particular pool where the growth rate is 152 gigabytes per month, and so it will actually hit that threshold as a projection on June 1st. And you can actually see the major and the minors as well. And here's a particular warning threshold. So I can actually change this view to show which volumes or pools are growing the most. I can also do the same thing for the warnings. Once I've selected it, you can actually see the pool usage. Take a look at the forecast. You see how the dotted line has calculated the forecast based on the actual growth that the volume has been using. As you see the forecast with the future dates, as you can see, it'll actually hit that threshold later on. Let's create a new pool. I'll just create one. I need to select a system here, and since it's on the A9000, it actually changes some of those checkboxes and those radio buttons. Notice I now have to put in a pool size and a reserve. If I choose back to XIV, it goes back to a regular or thin. Now the snapshot reserve area is how much I reserve for snapshots, and I need to put in the soft size. I now click on Create. Here's that new pool that we just created. You can see the size, and there's no volumes and currently not being used. The inspector shows the same amount of information on the right-hand side. Here's the free space. Now, inside the actions, I can actually change those thresholds. As you notice, I can also put a custom threshold. Once I click on the custom checkbox, I can actually then change the volume usage or the snapshot usage thresholds. So for example, I can change the warning to 85. I can do 95 down below, and I click on Apply. And now that will affect how the alerts happen for those particular pool thresholds. As you see, this is a system threshold on this particular warning, but you saw now how easily I can change it. If I click on that particular warning, I can actually bring up that actual warning. And as you can see, this is a pool threshold warning, and that's why I just brought up this particular pool. If I click on the threshold, you see that it's derived from the system, and now I can actually change the threshold. So if I add this to 85, it'll actually take care of this particular warning. I click Apply. And now notice the yellow has become a standard size and color shape, so that's why the alert has gone away. So we have now reduced the threshold warning so that it's gone from both views. You'll see it's gone on both sides. Let's go to Systems now. You see that I have a minor threshold warning. If I want to change the threshold, I can do it in the same way. So there I've selected the system. And here's all of its storage information. You can see this readout on both the gauges as well as on the decimal readout to the right. How much is free, and you can actually see on the gauges where everything stands in terms of the allocation. As you see on the last tab, you can actually see that I am not over the allocation threshold at all. You can actually see the physical capacity versus the actual system capacity. And to confirm, you see that I am nowhere close to being over allocated. There's my usage down below. If I want, I can click on this. I can actually bring up the physical usage and the forecast, as well as what's written and forecast. Now here's my projected and actual. Now if I'd like to do a nice trend and capacity forecast, I can click right here. That report just was created and now downloaded to my computer. So I unzip it. And here's the capacity planning report. You saw how easy it was to generate this, and this will go through the entire system. You can see that it shows not only the current system, but all the systems. Notice the color coding so that it shows where I have some threshold issues. You'll see the threshold warnings by color, so not only the 80%, but the 90%. And on the XIV side, you see that we see some threshold issues in the next 6 months. Now if I scroll down, you can actually see the growth rate by pool names as well as by free space. You can see how this is charted. Thanks again for watching this provisioning demo.